The storm did not move across the Colorado mountains. It ruled them. Wind howled through the pines like a living thing, lifting snow in fierce circles that erased the world. In that storm, Clara Whitmore staggered through the white wasteland, her breath breaking in her chest. Her dress, torn and ruined, snapped in the wind like a rag on a fence. Every step felt like she was walking deeper into her own grave. She didn't feel the cold anymore. That frightened her the most. Cold meant she was alive. This numbness meant something else. Her boot caught on a rock hidden beneath the snow, and she pitched forward, hitting the drift with a soft thud. She didn't try to rise. She didn't even lift her head. The white world spun slowly, fading at the edges. "Let this be it," she whispered, her lips barely moving. "Let this end. No more debts. No more running. No more men who spoke kindly only when they wanted something. No more Richard Hartley." The wind swallowed her words and carried them down the mountain. Just as the darkness started to close in, she heard it. A heavy rhythm. Hoofbeats muffled by snow. Terror clawed at her weak heart. If Hartley's men had found her, she would rather freeze right here than be dragged back. She tried to burrow deeper into the snow, but her limbs refused to obey. The hoofbeats stopped. A shadow blocked the swirling snowlight. A deep voice cut through the wind. "Damn fool woman." It wasn't Hartley. It wasn't any man she knew. Clara forced her eyes open. A figure stood over her, tall and broad, wrapped in thick furs. Snow clung to a dark beard that covered most of his face, and his eyes, cold gray, storm-weathered, studied her with a mix of concern and frustration. Elias Granger. He'd been checking his trap lines when he spotted what he'd first thought was a wounded doe collapsed in the snow. Then he saw the torn dress, the pale hand, the lifeless way she lay there. He knelt beside her and pulled off one glove, placing warm fingers against her throat, a pulse, weak, but there. "You're alive," he muttered. "Don't know how, but you are." He lifted her gently. She weighed almost nothing. The storm roared around them as he carried her to his horse, a sturdy mountain breed named Brutus. Clara moaned softly when Elias settled her across the saddle, the sound small and broken, tugging something deep inside him that he thought he buried long ago. He climbed up behind her, wrapping one strong arm around her waist to keep her upright. The warmth of his body pressed through layers of fur and wool, grounding her in a world that kept spinning. Clara drifted in and out of awareness. "Please," she murmured once, "don't make me go back." Elias's jaw tightened. He didn't ask what she meant. Mountains taught a man when a stranger didn't want questions. By the time his cabin appeared through the blur of snow, dark logs, a thin curl of smoke from the chimney, Clara was barely conscious at all. Inside, he kicked the door closed and carried her straight to his bed, the only bed in the cabin. The fire burned low, so he piled on more wood until heat poured through the room. Her clothes were soaked with melted snow, cold enough to kill her. He hesitated only a moment before practicality overruled propriety. Living alone in the mountains stripped a man of useless niceties. He worked carefully, removing the frozen garments and wrapping her in his warmest blankets. Her skin was pale as new snow, bruises blooming across her ribs and arms, fresh ones. Someone had hurt her, and recently. He ground herbs, heated water, and prepared medicines with the steady hands of someone who had tended wounds before. But every now and then, his eyes drifted back to the woman lying in his bed, breathing shallow and faint. When she stirred hours later, she whispered a name through cracked lips. "Samuel, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Elias sat at the bedside before realizing he'd even moved. "No Samuel here," he said softly. "You're safe." Her hand lifted weakly, searching for something in the dark. Without thinking, Elias caught it. Her fingers were ice. She held on like he was the last solid thing in a world falling apart. Her eyes opened, Not fully, but enough to find his face. "What name?" she whispered. "Granger," he said. "Elias Granger. I found you in the snow." "Should have let me." Her voice was fading. "Should have let me die." His voice came out rougher than he meant. "Not happening while you're in my care." She blinked slowly, studying him with eyes the color of amber honey. Then her lids fluttered, closed, and she slipped back into unconsciousness, still gripping his hand. Elias sat there long after she slept, the storm raging outside, sealing them alone in his solitary haven. He'd lived 6 years without another heartbeat in the cabin, 6 years without anyone needing him or touching him. Now this broken woman lay in his bed, breathing unevenly, changing the air around her without even knowing it. And for the first time in years, Elias Granger felt something move under the ice around his heart. Something dangerous. Something alive. He tightened the blanket around her, stepped back, and forced himself to breathe. Whatever ghosts chased Clara Whitmore into the mountains, they would wait for the storm to pass. For tonight, there was only the fire. Clara woke to the steady rhythm of wood being split. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The ceiling above her was rough-cut logs, not the white plaster of her Denver home. The air smelled of pine smoke and leather, not perfume and polished floors. Then memory rushed back like a cold river, and she jerked upright, heart pounding. Easy there. Elias Granger sat near the fireplace, the morning light falling across his shoulders as he cleaned a rifle with calm, practiced movements. He didn't look her way at first, giving her time to gather herself. She pulled the blankets tighter. Only then did she notice she was wearing a clean shirt far too large for her. Her cheeks burned. "Your clothes are drying by the fire," he said simply. "You wouldn't have survived the night in them." There was no embarrassment in his voice, no curiosity, no judgment, just truth. "There's a clean shirt on the chair," he added. "It'll swallow you whole, but it's warm." Clara watched him for a long moment. The man was a contradiction, rugged and quiet, stern but strangely gentle. This was someone who had survived harsh winters alone and learned to live with silence. "How long have I been here?" she asked. 2 days. Her heart seized. 2 days meant Hartley had time to track her, time to close in. "I should leave," she said quickly, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. Elias finally looked at her. His gaze was steady, unhurried. "Leavin' what? Those ruined boots?" He nodded toward the hearth where her shoes lay split and almost useless. "You won't make it 100 yards in that snow." He wasn't wrong, but staying carried a different danger. The kind that lived inside her chest, where fear twisted into something else whenever he looked at her. "I can pay you for your trouble," she offered, "once I reach town." "Don't want your money," Elias said. "Then what do you want?" He turned back to the rifle, wiping the barrel clean with slow, even motions. "For you to stay alive long enough to leave when you can walk on your own." The days settled into a quiet rhythm. Elias kept to himself, working outside during daylight hours, checking traps, splitting wood, hauling water. Clara tried to help. She swept the floor, warmed meals, brewed strong pine tea. At first he protested her efforts, but gradually he accepted them. Though she caught a flicker of surprise each time she completed a chore he didn't ask her to do. She learned his habits. How he checked the windows before bed. How he paused before crossing the room, as if listening to a past no one else could hear. How he rubbed his shoulder when storms were coming. He watched her, too, quietly. One evening, as Clara mended a tear in his coat, Elias glanced over. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I want to," she replied softly. "Makes me feel useful." He didn't answer, but something softened in his expression. Nights were the hardest. The firelight wrapped the room in warm gold, and silence sat between them like an old friend. Sometimes Clara hummed a tune her mother taught her. The sound filled the cabin gently, and once she caught Elias staring at her with something close to longing. When she stopped humming, he looked away quickly. Another night, she woke cold and disoriented, the fire dim. She looked toward the window and froze. Elias stood outside, shirtless in the snow, moonlight outlining the powerful shape of him. He scooped handfuls of snow and rubbed it across a scar that slashed from his shoulder down his back. It was deep and ugly, a wound that had nearly carved him in half. She watched, breath held, as he braced himself against the cold like he deserved the pain. When he came back inside, she quickly returned to bed, pretending to sleep. But she felt him pause beside her. Felt him gently pull the blanket higher around her shoulders. Felt the room shift with something unspoken. The next morning, awkwardness hung between them like fog. Elias kept his distance, moving around the cabin with stiff politeness. By afternoon, Clara couldn't bear it anymore. "Why do you live alone up here?" she asked, handing him a mug of coffee. He hesitated. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. "Because it's what I deserve," he said finally. "No one deserves to be alone. You don't know what I've done. And you don't know what's been done to me," she said quietly. "But you took me in anyway." Their eyes met, something raw passing between them. Truth, pain, recognition. That night, something shifted. Clara was mending by the fire when a log slipped from Elias's grasp, nearly crushing her foot. Before she could react, Elias moved fast, catching both the log and her waist at once. They ended up close, too close, pressed against the cabin wall, sharing breath. Clara felt his heartbeat pounding through his coat. His eyes dropped to her lips. For one suspended moment, the world held its breath. But then he stepped back, jaw tight, walls slamming back into place. "You should go inside," he said quietly. "Elias, please don't run from this." He didn't answer. That night, Clara lay awake, listening to him shift restlessly by the fire. Soft moonlight filled the room. She could see him, sitting upright, head bowed, tortured by something he refused to name. She rose and crossed to him, kneeling beside him. "Tell me," she whispered. His voice cracked like a man confessing to the storm itself. "I killed someone," he said, "by accident, a little girl, and I don't know how to live with that." Clara took his hand gently in both of hers. "You're not the man you were then." "No," he whispered, "I'm worse, because now I care again." He lifted his gaze to hers, and she saw everything he hid: grief, shame, longing, fear, and the spark of something deeper, something dangerous, something beautiful. "Elias," she whispered, heartbreaking for him. He reached for her, then stopped himself, trembling, torn between the past that haunted him and the future he feared to want. Clara cupped his face. "You saved me," she whispered. "Let me help save you." For the first time since she arrived, he let himself lean into her touch. Not completely, not safely, but enough for hope to slip through. Then the storm outside grew stronger, rattling the cabin walls like warning drums. Their fragile peace would not last. Something, or someone, was coming. The storm finally broke 2 days later, leaving the world clean and bright, as if nothing cruel had ever touched it. But inside the cabin, a different kind of storm hovered. Elias moved around quietly, too quiet, as if preparing himself for something neither of them had the courage to name. Clara watched him from the hearth. She didn't know exactly what haunted him, but she knew enough to understand one thing. He was trying to convince himself she didn't belong here. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady in that way a person sounds, only when they're holding themselves tightly together. "When the snow melts," he said, not meeting her eyes, "I'll take you to Fort Collins. You can catch a stage to wherever you want to go." Her heart throbbed painfully. She forced a nod. "Wherever I want," she echoed. But anywhere she chose would be a lie. Richard Hartley would follow her. His men would trail the scent like wolves, and sooner or later she'd be dragged back into the life she'd fled. Later that evening, as the fire crackled low, Clara finally spoke the words trapped in her chest. "Elias, I wasn't lost the night you found me." He stilled. She told him everything. Samuel's debts, Hartley's threats, the forced proposal she never had the power to refuse. the escape into the winter storm meant to be her last act of freedom. When she finished, Elias sat very still, jaw clenched so tight she feared it would crack. "He hurt you," he said. "Not a question. A promise of reckoning." Clara shook her head. "He'll hurt you too if I stay." But Elias rose, pacing like a caged animal. A new fierceness carved itself across his face, quiet, cold, controlled. "Let him come," he said, voice like iron. "I won't let anyone take you." Before Clara could speak again, a thudding knock broke through the cabin walls. Both froze. 3 horses stood outside. 3 shadows. 3 men. Elias stepped between Clara and the door without hesitation. The lead rider spoke politely, almost pleasantly. "Evening, Mr. Granger. We'd appreciate it if you let the lady step outside." Clara's heart dropped into her stomach. Richard Hartley had found her. Elias opened the door halfway but did not move aside. His grip tightened on his rifle. "You rode a long way for nothing," he said. "On the contrary," Richard replied calmly, his cold eyes landing on Clara behind Elias's shoulder. "I rode for exactly what I'm owed." "You don't own her," Elias growled. Richard's smile was thin and cruel. "Everything has a price." Her late husband understood that. Clara stepped forward despite Elias's warning glare. "I won't go with you." "You will," Richard said simply, "because the alternative is watching this man die for you. And something tells me you wouldn't stomach that." Elias's jaw twitched, but Clara grabbed his arm before he could move. Richard leaned forward in the saddle. "Come now, Clara. You didn't think the mountain would hide you forever, did you?" Elias lifted his rifle a hair. "Leave." Richard's 2 men shifted, hands drifting toward their holsters. And Clara knew exactly how this would end if she stayed here another second. 3 guns. 1 mountain man. 1 widow. Blood on the snow. She couldn't let Elias become a killer again, not for her. "I'll go," she said. "No," Elias snapped, stepping in front of her, but she pushed past him. She looked Richard in the eyes. "If I go with you, you leave him alone. Forever." Richard smiled. "A fair trade." "It's not fair," Elias said hoarsely, grabbing her hand. "You're not his to take." Clara cupped his cheek gently. "You told me once not to run from what I fear," she whispered. "Now I'm asking you not to run from who you are. Live, Elias. Heal, and when the time is right." She swallowed, forcing strength into her voice. "Come for me." Richard jerked her forward and lifted her into the saddle. Elias's eyes burned into hers the whole time, fear and fury battling inside him. She didn't cry, not yet. She just held his gaze. "I don't want to be saved tonight," she whispered. Elias took a step toward her. "Clara." "I want to be chosen." Then Richard pulled the reins and Clara disappeared down the snow-packed trail, the sound of hooves fading into the cold. Elias stood in the doorway long after the riders vanished, the storm returning, not on the mountain, but in him. His chest heaved with rage and pain, and for the first time in 6 years his eyes burned with a purpose. He whispered into the empty silence, "I will choose you. I swear it." The fever hit him 3 days later. Grief cracked him open. Infection took hold where an old wound had torn open during the confrontation. Elias nearly died. Twice. It was a trapper named Josiah who found him, dragged him back from the edge, and cursed him for being a fool. But when Elias recovered enough to stand, the fire in his eyes hadn't dimmed. It had sharpened. As the snow melted and spring crept through the valley, Elias rebuilt himself. Body, mind, heart, purpose. Gone was the hermit who hid in the mountains. In his place rose a man determined to fight, not with blind rage, but with clarity and resolve. He tracked Clara across 3 states. He found allies in unexpected places. He outwitted Hartley at every turn. And on a clear morning in spring, under the soft sun of a new season, he found her again. Clara stood on a balcony, a prisoner behind polished railings and silk curtains. She gasped when she saw him below, alive, strong, and carved with the kind of resolve that could move mountains. He tipped his hat. "I came," he called softly, "just like I promised." Her tears spilled instantly. "I knew you would." What followed wasn't a gunfight. It wasn't reckless violence. It was a battle of wits, courage, and truth. And together, Clara's strength and Elias's determination, they broke free of the man who tried to own her. By summer, they had a small cabin in Montana Territory, a garden, a life they built with their own hands. Not perfect, but theirs. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Clara stood in the doorway, watching Elias plane wood for their new table. "You saved me," she whispered. He looked up, smiling softly. "You didn't need saving. You just needed someone to choose you." She stepped into his arms, her voice trembling with the truth she finally understood. "And you did." He kissed her forehead gently. "Every day," he said, "for the rest of my life." Outside, the wind moved softly through the pines. No storm, no threat, only peace. Home. Together. At last.